Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. What will 2020 hold for Andy Ruiz Jr., the former unified champion, who now goes into 2020 no belts and looking to salvage some of his reputation after a one-sided loss to Anthony Joshua, which afterwards he admitted he didn't really train hard enough. And also he ate his way to 283 pounds. He says he was too heavy for the fight and that if he had have been lighter, Anthony Joshua would have had a tougher fight. A lot of excuses have come from Andy Ruiz Jr. since the loss to Joshua on December 7th, but that is in the books now and he has to rebuild. So what does 2020 hold? Because it could go one of a couple of ways, and one of them could see him inactive for part or most of 2020, and that is a real possibility. But first, I'll just sort of premise the video here. I waited a couple of weeks to do this video simply for the fact I wanted the dust to settle from the big fight in Saudi Arabia, and also some of the statements that different respective parties involved were making. And obviously Ruiz afterwards coming out with excuses, not exactly showering himself in glory. In fact, he tried to almost by default take credit away from Anthony Joshua and say, well, if I had have done this, that and the other, it may have been a different story. But he can't get it back. And also I've seen a narrative that has popped up on social media, comment sections like my own for videos which are focused on Ruiz Joshua type coverage. People saying that Andy Ruiz Jr. was a one-hit wonder, that he didn't deserve to be a heavyweight champion, and similar sort of rhetoric. To that, I would say it wasn't Andy Ruiz Jr.'s first rodeo. In fact, he'd contested for a title earlier in his career in 2016. So Andy Ruiz Jr. is proven that he does belong at the top level, and even after that loss, I still class him as a top 10 fighter. But obviously now he has some work to do to rehabilitate his image and get fans back on side, because going into a title fight and then saying afterward, yeah, I didn't really train as hard as I could have, hasn't sat well with fans. And obviously he didn't come in the condition that he said he was going to come in. Remember, Ruiz Jr. said he was going to be 245 pounds and unbeatable at that weight. Instead, he was 38 pounds heavier and couldn't execute the game plan that Manny Robles had put in place. Now, I would note, Manny Robles, talking to boxing247.com, has stated he hasn't heard from Ruiz Jr. since Saudi Arabia since the loss. So he sent him a text message just recently, hasn't heard back from him. That is what he's told the website. So who knows what's going to happen there? Will Ruiz Jr. train with Robles again, or will Robles be some sort of fall guy? And in this article, and you can find that on boxing247.com, Ruiz Jr. took days of training, he was skipping sessions, all sorts of stuff during camp. But make of that what you will. But in terms of Ruiz Jr., all he can do now is look forward. And we've seen a little bit of that on social media. And, you know, a couple of days after the fight, there was this one. I'll be back stronger. I'll be a champion once again. I appreciate all the love and support from my true fans. I appreciate the haters as well and can't wait to prove the haters wrong once again. Back to the gym. Let's start this journey to the belts. And that photo there that accompanied that tweet from 2018. So it wasn't a recent photo, and he has posted another thing to social media regarding back to the gym. This photo here, see on screen. I mean, I don't know if this is recent or not. It's sort of hard to know. Has he gone back to the gym? And one of the things that I'll touch on in the video is, does he have the motivation anymore? It's a big question. And actually, let's cover that first, because he's had these two fights with Anthony Joshua. He's the best part of $20 million or more richer from it. Is he going to have the desire to put himself through the ringer for what will likely be lower level fights for a couple of fights at least before he gets a big time fight for a title or eliminator again? It is one of these things that it could be hard for him, and he obviously reveled in the champion lifestyle, all the trappings of being a champion. He was obviously caught up in it all. He got too confident, he got lazy, he didn't train as hard as he could have, and it ended in disaster. And I would note, even at this point, if he had have been 270 or 260 or even his 245, who's to say that the strategy that Joshua employed wouldn't have beaten Ruiz Jr. because the template was already there from the Joseph Parker fight back in 2016, which was a fight for the WBO title. If you fight from the outside, it really does nullify Andy Ruiz Jr. and his talents to some extent. Joshua followed what Parker did and maybe did it a bit better with the extra height, the reach. Arguably, he landed some more telling blows in that fight than Joseph Parker did. That was a much closer fight between Ruiz Jr. and Joseph Parker, much closer together in height. Ruiz Jr. listed at 6'2", maybe he's 6 foot, Parker 6'3", 6'4", Joshua 6'6", and a much longer reach than Parker. But boxing from the outside, clearly that is an effective tactic against Andy Ruiz Jr. And going forward, this will be something that has to be factored into the matchmaking, especially as they rebuild him to a title. That's if he, continues fighting, because with the best part of $20 million or so in his bank account, minus all the bits and pieces he would have had to pay, he's still a very wealthy man. Is that going to have any influence on him now post the loss to Joshua, which to some extent, despite the public statements and other bits and pieces, he himself will be massively disappointed in himself? Does he have the desire to continue? And will it be a case that we actually see that we don't see him for 6 months, possibly a year or more? He didn't fight for over a year after the Parker loss. What sort of desire is he going to have now? He's put those sort of obligatory sort of statements out there to the public. Who knows whether he has been training? He obviously hasn't been talking to his trainer, Manny Robles. He hasn't been training with him. Maybe those two will part way and Robles will end up being some sort of fall guy. Ruiz Jr. is not necessarily tethered to Robles, as he's not his long-term trainer. He's been with him for, a year or two, but it's not exactly like they've been training since the beginning. So maybe Robles will end up being a fall guy of sorts. I don't know. But it could be a case that Andy Ruiz Jr. has to really make some decisions now. Does he want it? Does he have that burning desire? Or is that going to be something that's going to sneak up on him, but only after several months out of the ring? But if Andy Ruiz Jr. is to come back to the ring, let's talk about some of the possible matchups. In the PBC stable, there's a number of options, but there's also a number of other guys within there that probably are unlikely because he's trained closely with them. He sparred a number of rounds with them throughout his career. He's good friends with them. Gerald Washington, he was Ruiz Jr.'s primary sparring partner for the fight in Saudi Arabia. Charles Martin, he sparred a number of rounds with him. So, those couple of guys, more unlikely. But if he was to start at a lower level within the, just to get a bit of a tune-up fight, because after this loss to Joshua, I wouldn't begrudge him coming back with a tune-up. And actually, maybe that's the best way to get him in there with a sort of softer fight first up. A winnable fight, not necessarily a knockover job, but someone like a Travis Kaufman. That could be an ideal reintroduction to the heavyweight division in 2020 as he looks to rehabilitate his image and get his career going again. And another fight that I quite like that had been talked about forever and a day, Andy Ruiz Jr. and Chris Arreola. That there would have some legs, some fan appeal given the sort of Mexican origins, and that's the themes around that fight. It's been talked about for a number of years. Another fight potentially. What about Dominic Breazeale? Breazeale himself will be looking to come back to the division, and he hasn't got a fight tabbed in at the moment. So that could end up working for both guys, and I think that's probably a very winnable fight for Andy Ruiz Jr. And going back to the style matchup, as I sort of talked about it, they're going to have to think carefully about the matchmaking. And these guys that I've named, they're not going to be able to stick and move for 12 rounds. Kaufman, Chris Arreola, Dominic Breazeale, all there to be hit, and I think they would be fan-friendly fights to watch. And the one that I would really like if they could actually make it, and I think it's a very competitive matchup, Adam Kovnatski. He's another guy that wouldn't be hard to find. It would be an absolute war between the two, and I think that would be a very fun fight, a fight at a slightly higher level than Breazeale, Arreola, and Kaufman. Would he step straight back into something like that? Not so sure, but if they were to, say for example, have that on the Wilder and Fury undercard as a co-main event, that would be great, but it would potentially be more likely Arreola and Ruiz Jr. or Kaufman and Ruiz Jr. And he probably wouldn't, as I mentioned, fight a guy like Gerald Washington or Charles Martin just because of the connections, the friendships. And a couple of other things to touch on. You may have seen recently some spurious stories that have been floating around some different mainstream media websites, which have talked about the WBC signing off on Andy Ruiz Jr. fighting Deontay Wilder. Just to note, that's absolute hogwash. how this has come about is he's back in the rankings. So technically, he is available to fight Deontay Wilder if Deontay Wilder had a voluntary and chose to fight Ruiz Jr. But a number of different mainstream media websites, not necessarily the boxing media, but sort of other media further afield, have picked that up and taken that to be that he's going to be fighting Deontay Wilder. And I sort of thought, you know, how did you get from he's ranked to now he's going to be fighting Deontay Wilder next or very soon? It just, yeah, I just sort of thought that sounded incredibly silly. And I thought, have you guys been following boxing for about 8 minutes? But Andy Ruiz Jr., I do hope to see him back in 2020. He is, with the right matchups, the right style clash, a very fun fighter to watch. Obviously, we've seen the blueprint from Joseph Parker and now improved upon by Anthony Joshua. There is a way to beat him. And I do sort of recall a number of people saying, no matter what Joshua did, it wouldn't work. Ruiz Jr. just had his number. But like Parker, Joshua able to keep it long, able to, you know, work the jab, a very effective punch, and throw in right hands. It may not have set the world on fire, but it was an effective way for Joshua to get his titles back. And Andy Ruiz Jr. is going to have to figure out a way to beat that sort of matchup if a guy is going to be boxing on the move for 12 rounds. That coming in at 283 pounds isn't going to help that. And Robles, Ruiz Jr.'s trainer, has said, look, we had a good game plan, but Ruiz Jr. just came in far too heavy. He was unable to execute it because of the extra weight. So hopefully Ruiz Jr. comes back and we see him in better shape, and that he does sort of come back to the division sooner rather than later, because the longer it drags on, the longer it'll probably just push out and out. And then in a year's time, we're like, well, what's happening with Andy Ruiz Jr.? And with the best part of $20 million he's earned from the past couple of fights, that could be something that is, you know, a pull to not fight again, because his family is secure. You know, he can provide for his, you know, extended family. This should be generational wealth if they look after it. So this could be something that does hinder Ruiz Jr.'s sort of hunger to be back in the ring, not the hunger for food, but to be back in the ring and competing. And if he couldn't get up for the biggest fight of his life in the rematch, what likelihood in a tune-up fight in, say, 3 months, 4 months' time? I'm happy to be proven wrong on that, and I'm happy to see him back in the ring as soon as possible, proving us all wrong and being in better condition. Will he be able to do it, though? It's another question. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.